All right, everybody. Thank you guys for tuning in tonight to Das Machine Online. We've got a real special guest here tonight, Mr. Ronan Harris of VNV Nation. Unfortunately, he just moved studios, and so he has no camera. So you get this really snazzy picture I found of him on the internet.
I don't know what picture you're using. I'm kind of like fearful of this. I'm going to have to tune in and see this. But how's it ever? Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody, wherever you are in the world.
We get people actually kind of from all over. The stupid light. I need to just stay on one.
You have this mood light going on. It's kind of it's freaking me out.
Yeah.
Hey.
So anyhow, how are things going over your side
Where?
of the pond?
Well, I've moved. I committed last year to moving office and studio. The place I was in, they weren't renewing the contract. So a buddy of mine who has a building company, he was renting a huge space in a brand new building and said, would you like to come in and share the space with me? And there was enough space for me to have set up my office again, and then like a big space for me to set up a studio. So having committed to that pre-virus, I've been working like in the basement where there is no signal whatsoever until we get the cell phone amplifier in, and it's been kind of liberating in a way to not have any contact with the outside world and just focus on bits and pieces. But I've been doing a lot of the work, bringing in experts where necessary. It's given me a great opportunity to redo a lot of things that I should have done in the last place. And I guess when everyone moves, they say, I can do it better next time. So a lot of power tools, a lot of cabling, a lot of soldering, a lot of fun like that. The office says, there's a camera somewhere in a box somewhere, and that's lost to forever. The rest is
some like Ronan pictures out there with like a big power drill, like just like be like the cover for like in the back image for like the next VNV, just Ronan there with like power drills just like this.
It would
give
be
a little bit of a Deadpool look with power drills.
Yeah. Actually not a bad idea. I don't know about me looking like Deadpool. I look more like Uncle Fester with power tools. The good thing is that I grew up. My dad was always sort of dabbling with like being a handyman around the house and stuff. So I learned a lot from him and from other people in my family. So I've never been shy of getting in and getting my hands dirty and what have you. So it's been fun. I've had to coordinate a lot of it with other people doing the bits and pieces, the technical bits and pieces. But absolutely, I'm more than happy. I've got the speaker set up. I've got the computer and everything set up, and I'm just on next week. It's all like cabling equipment up and getting the place up and running so I can start. I mean, I've already tested it out. Nobody can hear it outside, so that's the first thing.
Nobody gets to get that like preview of the next VNV album,
or hearing annoying sub bass coming through the wall, the stereo driving by.
I know I've been pissing off all my neighbors with all the bass that comes out when we do these shows. I'm just like, y'all just need to get over it because this is not stopping anytime soon.
I've had annoying neighbors where I've just basically taken the subwoofers and put them attached them to the ceiling and put on what the hell was, I think it was Brighter Death Now, because they were just annoying, and it sounded like I was living underneath a herd of horses. I just basically left them with the joyous sounds of gratuitous amounts of sub bass.
I think so many of us have done stuff like that. Our marketing director and I used to be roommates years ago, and we had these guys that lived next door to us that like would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to work, right? And they'd be playing the Latino music, the boom chicka boom chicka boom chicka boom, and they'd have it like super loud. I'm on the other side, I could even hear it. So we started on Friday nights when we were leaving to go out to Numbers. We would take his speakers and put them up against the wall, and then put on the Prodigy "Smack My Bitch Up" on repeat, and then leave.
Beautiful. That's art. That is a piece of art. But I think the best thing, I was trying to find something that was unrhythmic, that was deliberately not in time, because that's like, it's annoying when you have, say, something that sounds repetitious and then it misses a beat and it just annoys the crap out of people. I mean, what you really go for is maximum inconvenience. So that's it. I mean, other than that, we're in our own version of lockdown over here. Germany has its own particular flavor. Every country has its own idea of what works. For some reason, the German way of doing things, go figure, has worked. But we're still able to leave the house, and I can get in a car and drive up. I mean, I only live about 10 minutes away from my place, or from where I'm working now. So yeah, I can. everything's closed. That's it. That's the main thing. And everybody's doing home office or just walking around looking like, I don't know, sad zombies. People have lost everything in Vegas with that kind of like empty look on their face of tragedy.
You know what that looks like?
Yeah. We won't go there. We're not going to have any Vegas anecdotes here. But yeah, in general, I think it's there's a kind of a repetition. Every day is a kind of a Groundhog Day. There isn't much to do. I mean, the things that are open are like the supermarkets, the food stores, restaurants for takeaway. If you that's what you want, they do delivery. Pharmacies and that's really about it. Obviously, the hospitals and the medical centers. But it's like every day is Groundhog Day. There's, with the exception of, we can't leave the state. So there are like 16 states within Germany, like it's a federal country. And we're not allowed to travel for any reason, like any touristy reason, or I just want to go to the coast or I want to go to the beach. We're not allowed to do that. So the police have been fairly strict in kind of clamping down and keeping people within an area. But thankfully, Hamburg has got tons of green areas, tons of, even within the city lines, we've got like whole areas of fields and little country laneways and forests and what have you. So
Booking
the only thing
Hamburg now?
Yeah, nobody else has anything to do, so they're all doing the same thing. So you arrive at somewhere that would normally be completely deserted, and there's just tons of families. I mean, as long as everybody stays to a couple of two, like you're not allowed to be in a grouping of more than two people, and we have our social distancing and all that stuff, then everything's fine. And I mean, everyone can go out and walk, and everyone can go out and exercise and what have you. And people are generally, I have to be honest, they're generally looking after one another here. The neighbors keep looking in, asking if anybody needs anything. And I think there's kind of like a general kind of everyone sort of spitting on their hands and sort of rolling their sleeves up and saying, right, let's get to this. That's
great. That's great.
It's decent. I mean, they've kept the numbers down. They've managed to keep the fatality rate down. And even the number of people who've had like the severe cases, I think the fate worse than death is actually having the whole pneumonia thing and then surviving it, because the heart damage, lung damage, the other organ damage, like I've heard, because I've got a lot of friends who work in the medical area who are talking about the side effects from this, and it is horrific. All I want to know is, all right, I'm not a young sprite anymore, which puts me in a kind of a semi-risk category. So I just want to keep myself healthy. So I'm managing to stay the hell away from everybody, which is great. So, I'm not really different. I've just been my nerdy self, going to the office, working on my own, working on ideas, working on plans for what we're going to do to survive this shitstorm, because all our festivals and concert plans got annihilated.
Yeah, we haven't, I guess we're officially announcing it now. So the Vampire Ball that we do here in Houston, we've had planned out, huge thing.
Okay.
It's toast. We're having to cancel that, and hopefully everything's cool by the summer so that we can do our Summer Stomp Fest. So I don't know if that's even going to be a possibility to be.
Well, German government said that there won't be any large events until at least the end of August, and they're playing it very, very safe. They're taking it a step at a time, making sure that when they do make a change, that it's not going to have an adverse effect. But their main focus is obviously getting everyone back to work slowly but surely. So, to be honest, I haven't heard any kind of major issues here as far as people not being supported. We're doing things like, obviously, people who are freelancers are kind of shit out of luck with a lot of situations. I mean, the German government is paying, like your own is, subsidies to companies to keep them afloat. But like freelancers and a lot of our guys who work as, say, backliners and things like that, we're helping each other out. Like we check in on each other. Anybody need anything? Anybody need money? Anyone need their groceries taken care of and stuff like that? So, and there are, believe it or not, there were concerts here on the weekend, which absolutely astonished me. We had concerts in Germany. This will give you a kick. I wonder if this will work in Texas at a drive-in theater. So the band was up on stage.
Interesting.
The band was up on stage, and it was the first band to play since this kicked off. And I mean, people are acting like this thing's been going on for like years or something, like they've been stuck in, like minimum security prison, like staying at home with an ankle bracelet. They would never be able to crack hard time because they've done 4 weeks of this and they're climbing the walls. And I'm thinking, as I said to you guys before we started this interview, my grandparents in Ireland went through much, much worse for much longer years, and they coped and they managed. And I think this is light and mild by comparison. So I keep that in mind. But they had this concert anyway in Cologne where there was a folk band and a style of music, which I won't go into, called Schlager, which is just horrific, which is this sort of bad, cheesy, almost like 70s hit music crap. There's just this picture. It looked like somebody had set up a stage in the middle of a parking lot. Like if you can imagine like Walmart on sale day and the parking lot's full of cars and there's a stage in the middle. It looked kind of hilarious, but there's just cars all, pointed towards the stage. There's no PA. Everyone listens on their car radio. And I thought it was a brilliant idea because, it's getting people at least entertained, but it's also entertaining other people who are hearing about this. If all things go as planned, we may actually be able to do this. I know there's a queue of bands all lining up to try to do this, and there are very, very few drive-ins in Germany. So, we'll see. It'd be fun. That'd be a really interesting one to live stream because...
That would be kind of interesting. That would be kind of cool.
As soon as the band started, everybody started honking their horn. That was it. So unless you had in-ear monitoring, you were screwed.
Because I was about to ask, were people honking their horns and flashing turning the lights on, flashing them and stuff?
Oh, high beams the whole time. I mean, you can imagine Nova, instead of people holding cell phones above their head with the flashlight on, they're going to be all the high beams will go on, everyone will be honking their horns, playing them along with the music. You just can't stop doing that. I kind of think it's all very novel, and it's something we'll all look back on and tell our grandkids, and it's I remember doing a concert in front of I don't know. I mean, doing a concert in front of 500 cars.
Right. Well, we've actually been kind of working with trying to figure out for ourselves, because we've had a number of different acts that have actually approached us about, hey, can you guys put this together, about doing a straight up online concert. And so myself and our marketing director have been kind of looking into, because we're both big old giant nerds too. We're I think most of us actually that are in this scene are just big old, we're just techaholics. We've been looking into how can we put a band in front of people and then be able to charge because we do this thing on Twitch, right? So we can't be if you want to come in here, you have to pay a cover charge to get in the door, because we treat it like a nightclub. In a way. So, how do we do this with a concert? Because we still want the bands to be able to get paid. And so I think we might have a solution. I'm not sure. If we do, I'll let you know. And
we've looked into this. We really checked it. We called a couple of the clubs in Hamburg and asked if there was the possibility of even doing something like that we could just live stream for fun. They were very sort of strict. Everyone was being overly cautious, and there were sort of strict social distancing rules. So there's going to be a kind of a relaxation of these rules very shortly, possibly next week, starting on Monday already, where at least, schools for kids and kindergartens will open and what have you. So if they relax the rules, then, we can possibly get into a venue and do a concert with no audience, which will be fun. We've done sound checks. It's the same thing. And the great thing is, that people out there are watching through the camera. I'll feel all dirty. I'll feel like I'm kind of doing pay-per-view kind of
We're all kind of like cam girls now.
Yeah.
Well, Ronan, I know Scott and Danny both have some questions that they'd like to ask, so I'm gonna hand the floor over to them for a couple of minutes and let them ask. I actually have a couple of questions I'll ask you here in a little bit that my marketing director is hey, can you please ask him these? I'm okay, fine, I'll ask.
No problem. Let's go.
All right. Cool. Well, let's jump right in. I've got one question. I recently did my 20-year anniversary mega mix from the release of Empires, and pulled in all my favorite tracks from all the albums, and then collaborated on that on my Mixcloud with Dimitri Berserk from Mexico, and used his opening set from the live show in February at the VNV concert. So it was a really popular episode, and while we were working on that project, we talked about just what a difference there was between Advance and Follow, Praise the Fallen, and then the transition to Empires and Future Perfect. And we were curious about what made that transition, and the music moved so far forward, and it was just really amazing. There was really nothing else out there like it at the time, whereas the other two albums were much more EBM, kind of, you could tell that pure industrial influence, but you went so fast forward on the next albums.
Let me see. So Advance and Follow was a collection of bedroom demos, things that I tinkered with over the years that I just basically never thought would get anywhere. I met when I was living in Toronto, I kind of started working on some of these, and then I moved back to London. I hooked up with a band from Holland who were signed to a small German label who they just liked it because it was really, really underground and everybody was getting a shot at, releasing something. And I didn't really have a great opinion about this. I kind of thought this was more entertaining for me rather than it would be entertaining for anyone in an audience. But it was amazing for me. I was more amazed that people were giving me a bit of money to go into a studio and have that studio record all these demos into a finished album. It came out, there were supposedly 700 copies pressed. I have since learned that there were a lot more than that pressed, but never mind. And when I came home from the studio after recording Advance and Follow, thinking nothing of it, I set up the equipment in the bed in my living room, and I wrote Ascension. And the tracks, just as the way I describe it, is that it felt like a cork, like the bottle had been uncorked, and all this stuff that I'd had, cycling around, had been, washed through my system. It was out of the way, and everything I was going to do from that was fresh. So I had all these sort of sounds and sequences and little sort of riffs and whatever built up as you tinker away. The whole album just seemed to write itself. Solitary was written. Like, this wasn't even on the album. It wasn't even a song until about the night before I was supposed to go into the studio. I had some equipment at home, and I just was, again, tinkering around and practicing everything and making sure that all the samples were ready and that all the equipment was working. And I wrote Solitary, and I finished it up over that whole week that I'd been recording. When I came home, I would work on it, and I just wasn't getting a lot of sleep, and I was just so... It's weird. Whenever I hear Praise the Fallen or hear any of those tracks, I am literally in the room. Well, not literally, obviously, but, in my memory, I am there, and I can smell the room. I can describe its dimensions, the color of the wall, the texture of everything. It's quite a visceral experience. I was going through why things changed was that my life started to go awry. A lot of things that I'd taken for granted, a lot of very important things in my life really messed up. Actually, it sort of went from the perspective of things were going to be bad to complete and utter shitstorm. There's a lot of metaphors in Empires where I describe the aftermath of that, which is why Empire sounded so different. But Praise the Fallen was never written to be, or never recorded to be released. It was written as something for me personally. I had no illusions about releasing it. I didn't really think that anybody would like what I did. I just did it for myself, as a document to myself of everything that was going on in me at the time and who I was as a person, as a kind of a testament. I gave cassettes of it to friends. Two of my friends loved it so much they just, I guess you have that kind of also sentimental feeling when it's something that your friend made. It feels homemade and it feels more real that way. And I kind of guessed that was why they were feeling this way about it. But they urged me to release it. And then I'd become friends with a couple of guys in Covenant. And one of them said, no, you really have to release this. So went off and did some concerts with them as a support act in Holland. And Holland was this kind of starting point for me for some reason. And they gave a cassette of it to the head of their label, which was Offbeat at the time. And then there you go. And the rest is history. But why the curve? I mean, Praise the Fallen involved a lot of my influences. It was everything from like what was Goa trance at the time, which was kind of in a way EBM based in the 80s. I'd been very much into industrial in the very early 80s, a word that lost its meaning. But I'd always been listening to avant-garde music of all different types. I listened to a lot of orchestral music, which had a huge influence on the sound. And I loved collecting sounds that gave me the impression or the texture of an orchestra and incorporating them in with these big sort of almost symphonic soundscapes. I didn't want to obey rules and I didn't care. I just did the music as it felt good to me. I didn't imagine it being played on a dance floor because, I used to have this joke about saying no bass drum before 1 minute 30. Like you would have these massive like intros and what have you. But I absolutely adored the experience. And from that, I went off and played a festival in Germany where the owner of the festival wanted us badly on the bill. And Honor had already been on a couple of compilations and was doing the rounds in the clubs. And nobody had heard anything else. And they were playing these new songs that nobody knew. And it really just exploded from there. When it comes to writing music, I've always said that, like it or not, I make what means something to me. I make what provokes a reaction in me and reflects myself at the time. It's in a way, it's like a diary. And I don't pay any heed to, I want to stick in a style or I want to stick to a format that works because that's it's not really me. And it's not something that I would ever naturally want to do. And I would feel disingenuous to myself if I was to then keep sort of harping on and keep playing the same thing over and over. So I listened to a lot of different styles of music. London was an absolute powerhouse at the time for all different forms of electronic music, a lot of underground dance music. And, you know, you can take it from the 80s and I remember I used to go to a club in London called the Hard Club in the late 80s, which was the prototype industrial club. If you like, we would never have called it industrial over here. Industrial over here was, you know, Neubauten and, you know, Test Department and Finny Tribe and things like that. So we were going to this club, which was playing like New Beat and EBM and all people even just called it industrial electronic music. All these influences were kind of flying away at me, and London was just full of lots of different types of electronic sounds that had kind of split off from those EBM days, those sort of Front 242 Nitzer Ebb days, and that had branched off into people doing, say, underground techno and what have you. And all of those things I continued to listen to, and listening to, say, early Goa, which was quite industrial in its sound and quite hard. Every different style of music, I've never been shy of listening to different styles, and it all kind of gelled together. When it got to making Empires, again, I had no illusions about this being anything, because Praise the Fallen had been mildly successful and had been fun, and it created a little sort of, some people didn't really know how to genreize it. It was so diverse. I mean, people who heard the original cassette got to hear that the very last track on the album, which is this unnamed track, which follows a minute's silence, was had vocals, but the record label were completely against me releasing a sort of it would have actually been a nice way to indicate a sort of sound that I would continue to do for years to come. But they didn't like the idea of me singing vocals on some sort of soft arpeggio track, regardless of who it was inspired by. I mean, I would say that song has more to do with the Cocteau Twins than it has to do with anyone else. And it's quite bizarre pointing out the references and the little sort of flavors that I was just imitating or hinting at in that album. So the track came out as an instrumental on the album, and it was this weirdly diverse album with lots of different styles and sounds on it. And that's kind of more my style, is to be diverse, and because I don't feel any one sound represents me, and I kind of like to compile albums together like a book. When it got to Empires, as I say, my life had turned into an enormous shitstorm, and I made a lot of analogies on the album, and I wrote that album as a way to be a light to myself, whereas other people have someone in their life that gives them guidance and gives them words that they can live by, or gives them some kind of inspiration. I didn't really have that at the time. There was a considerable lack of that in my life. And what happened was I wrote tracks like Arclight, referred to an artificial light that was invented for lighthouses. It was, for me, this artificial light by which I would guide myself. It was kind of like, you know, you're sitting there wondering whether you really want to wake up the next morning or not. I'd kind of reached a pit in my life. And I was writing this album as a way for me in my kind of empty state to guide myself, and it sort of resonates when I listen back now. I hear those words and I know where I was and what was going on in my life at the time. I never knew what it would do for other people. I made, and I actually have this in writing, as in I posted this somewhere, where I said that if I release, say, Praise the Fallen, 1,000 people may buy it. But if there are 2 people out there in cow towns anywhere who think someone else thinks like me and life is okay and there's nothing wrong with being me, then it served a purpose. I had the same idea about Empires. I didn't think it was, I couldn't reflect on my own music and critique it as to how other people might experience it. But that album was pure heart and soul for me. I mean, I bled on that album. I hear the tone in my voice when I'm singing certain songs, and I remember what was going through my mind. And it's really amazing how an emotional state in your life can unlock vast treasure troves of creativity. I'm going to tell you something about Empires which will scare a lot of people. Not scare, sorry, that's the wrong word. There was a magazine in Germany who sent someone over to do an album report. And they came over and he stayed at my place for a couple of days. And he said, so play me the album. And I went, I can't. And he said, well, why? And I said, well, because I don't work like this. I have all these little sequences and little ideas, and when I go into the studio, I'm going to compile them together. And he said, okay. And I said, actually, it was really important for me that you saw how I work, and that I could hear all this in my head. And I know that when I get into the studio, I'm going to put all this stuff together, and it'll all happen with the vibe, as in like a stone rolling down a hill, and it'll gather speed and gather speed. So he heard a couple of the ideas, and he heard me talking about the concepts and what I wanted to do with the album, but he didn't hear anything. He heard a couple of sequences, which would be minor sequences in tracks. 2.5 weeks later, I had a regular job. I worked, a 9 to 5, and I'd leave there at about 6, head over to the studio, work until 1 o'clock in the morning. And in 2.5 weeks, I created the album from scratch, working evenings and one day on a weekend. That's how intense that period was. It was like you knew that when you had nothing pre-written, but you had it all in your head. You knew the vibe, you knew the feeling of it, you knew what it needed to say and how it needed to sound. And I went in and just created it. I brought in a ton of old synths and some bits and pieces I picked up. I was really influenced at the time by a lot of the kind of underground dance music that was coming out of Europe. And that kind of added a flavor to what I was doing. But realistically, whatever the style of the songs, it was amazing how much major label interest it gathered. Like people hearing it at the time, the major label industry was like full steam ahead. It was like business could never be better. And they were hunting around looking for artists. And I got all these offers from them saying, "You write great songs, kid." That kind of thing, Guy chewing a matchstick, But I had no interest in that because I was making music for my own reasons. I wasn't entirely happy even being on a label because there were so many compromises that would need to be made. I mean, you would send them a track and say, "Yeah, this is going to be a single," and they go, "Nah, we're not happy with this. Can you go back and change something?" I kind of felt in a way that I was rebelling against them. And then I would go off and reluctantly do these things, but I probably would have done them anyway if nobody had been telling me what to do. One thing about me is I love doing it because I want to do it. But if someone forces me to do it, I don't want to do it. And I didn't really like the politics, even if this was a small little label. And I was saying to bands who were, getting somewhat successful, and I said, look, when you're selling 250,000 albums, you can do what you like. You can walk around like you're King Muck. I don't care. But until then, we're still small little artists on a small little outward fringe of the music scene that has nothing to do with the big steamroller of the music industry that's running along at the moment. This is like pre-Napster. I said, we just have fun with it. I took a break from work after Empires was released to handle all of the concerts because suddenly the album went into the top 20 or top 30 in the German charts, which was quite something at the time. I was suddenly getting all these concert requests and I couldn't take all this time off from work. So I took a break and I decided, okay, I'll take a year off and, I'll get it out of my system and I'll have some fun with it. I've no illusions with this. I really didn't understand what was going on until, and this is going to sound weird. I didn't speak German, so I couldn't understand what people were saying to me after concerts. They could have been describing the contents of a ketchup bottle to me, but or telling me like a nifty trick for how to clean coins or something. But I arrived. We did these shows in North America. After that, we did I think 6 shows, and the first one was in Orlando at a club called Das Maschine, which I've since learned, as you've probably been told, is grammatically incorrect. However,
same here. We get it all the time.
Won't go there. It's really funny. Germans always laugh when they see the names of clubs like Das Maschine or Das Bunker, and I keep trying to tell them that Das is kind of our go-to. That you can put Das in front of any word, just pronounce it German, and that for us is a fake German word. But
also, because Americans, those of us who speak English, will see D and won't read it as die. And
yeah, exactly.
Die Bunker. I mean, Die Machine.
Die Machine sounds like the name of a bad sci-fi movie from the 60s.
I think that's something you tune on Sci-Fi Channel on Friday night and be like, my lord, who the hell did they get to come on this? I've never seen this guy. Oh, that's that F list, not even D list, F list actor.
Oh my God, Michael Rennie ended up doing Cyborg 2087 and movies like that.
Right.
Which is since he'd done The Day the Earth Stood Still. But howsoever, I guess the music, to sort of sum this all up, the music has evolved with me and the constant changes within my life as a reflection of me. And also, I really had no idea how to produce records, how to work compressors, how to work EQs. I was just, sodding along at home with synths and whatever into a crappy mixer and making very budget sounding stuff. And it wasn't until I got into the studio that the guy there had done a lot of, he'd recorded a lot of bands. And he was really the master in sort of teaching me how to make all this sound like it gels and fits together, no matter how amateur I think it sounded. I also didn't know how to turn what I wanted into songs, and I guess I was reluctant or reticent about writing songs, like in a strict sort of song construction or format. And I'd listened to indie music, all of my grown-up years and all my teen years, so they were always songs. I mean, you think like the Buzzcocks, Ever Fallen in Love, is like a simple 2.5-minute punk song that follows a really, really great format, but it's a phenomenal song. When I got to Empires, I was finally able to write songs and feel okay about it. I guess I'd done that whole kind of, no, this isn't real. If I write a song, I can't do that. And with Praise the Fallen, I wasn't really adhering or wasn't restricted by any format. And Empire's every album has opened doors for me in some way in teaching me a whole load of new things that allow me to be able to get what's in my head out better. I played Empires the first time outside the studio. No one had heard it. The album hadn't even been heard by the label. The weird thing we used to do back in those days was go on tour before the album came out. So people would actually get to hear it live. And they still came to the concerts and everything like that, but before they'd even, the album had even been released, which might seem weird, but people got to see the passion. They got to see the look in your eye and how you feel about the song when you're singing it. The same thing happened the first time I sang Beloved in Berlin. I mean, I thought, oh, they hate it, because they just stood there staring at me. And I didn't know really what to do. I kind of thought, oh, well, okay. I kind of knew that might be a little bit too commercial or sweet sounding for them. And then afterwards, people were just writing all over the internet going, you have to hear this song. But like with Empires, I was so exhausted. I arrived for the first gig of this tour, and even the sound guy hadn't heard the instrumentals. I mean, obviously Mark had, but no one had heard the finished album with the vocals. And I put it in someone's car stereo and fell asleep in the car while he drove. And he was supposed to be driving me home. And there were like me and 4 other people in the car. And I woke up a couple of hours later and I said, well, hang on, wasn't it only a half-hour drive home? And they all just stared at me like they had basically driven down the Autobahn and driven around Germany, basically listening to this album 3 times.
While you're like passed out in the car.
Passed out, like there he is. There's the artist with drool dribbling out inside of
Thank God smartphones weren't around then, right?
Snoring and farting to myself, and whatever things people do while they're asleep and they look less desirable than they should. But the thing I was telling you about was we went to Orlando and people came up afterwards and they started to share their personal experiences in their life. And that's where it really gelled for me about how this music was connecting with people, because I'd heard some things like that with Praise the Fallen, but never anything like what the reaction to Empires was. I still had a ton of ideas. I think when I finished Empires, I remember I went home and I just for the sake of it, I wanted to work on something completely different. I wrote Arena and Perpetual, which have kind of got a sort of similar indie vibe to them, in about 2 days of just tinkering around, just to kind of detox myself. And it just kind of went from there. And I think the only reason why there was such a break between Future Perfect and Matter and Form was that we parted ways with, or I parted ways with the label, and it was a rather ungraceful process. And I had to kind of establish things and set up a label for myself and really get my life together. And plus, I just moved to Germany, and here I was without a label, setting up my own label, going out on my own. And it was a very, very scary experience. And then 2003, I started to write Matter and Form, and then it just kind of rolled from there. Sorry, long-winded answer to your
No, it's awesome.
I'll tell you myself. Your music has gotten me through some of the darkest times in my life.
wow.
Because, like you say, people do cue in on that with you. I think that's one of the big things. Yes, playing your stuff in clubs is great because it's got a good beat and people like to dance to it. But there's that side of it that people feel what it is that you're talking about in your songs. They feel it. Now, I will say this: my favorite song by you guys to this day is still "Airships."
Oh wow.
It's still my favorite, and the reason it's my favorite was the first time I heard it. I was sitting in the office's nightclub that I used to work in, and I was kicked back in my chair, and I've got speakers set up around me in the office, like I'm waiting on deliveries to come in, and like that song plays, and I'm like I had my eyes closed, leaned back, and that song took me on a trip. I wasn't fucked up or anything, like right? I wouldn't trip on acid or anything. It took me on a
It's
trip.
it's strange. I was, when you make an album, you kind of think, all right, I don't know how the label, how the label's going to respond to this. I want to do this because I want to do this. I mean, it tied in with the focus of what the album was about to me, and I wanted it kind of it was a part of me as well. As a child, I was always filled with wonder, and I found a lot of the people around me to be very, very dull, and they didn't really either the imagination had been beaten out of them or the system itself sucked the imagination out of them. And I'd never been able to stem that. So in me, it was kind of a reflection of myself. It's like, imagine a kid in some futuristic, sort of retro futurist city seeing an airship for the first time. And it was really just a metaphor for the sense of wonder that fills someone who's like, from that moment on, that you cannot unsee that. You cannot, to go back and use another euphemism I'd be using, like you can't put the cork back in the bottle.
Yeah.
And that really reflected myself. And some people were, they didn't quite get it because, this scene, there's people who demand, I want stuff that sounds like this. And I'm not really in that business, and I never have been. But I say, well, there's other stuff on the album, which is great. And you can listen to that. Why does everything have to fit with a very narrow-minded view? So I kind of, at that point, I was realizing that I'm just going to continue doing my own thing, and I'm not really I don't mind constructive criticism. I like when people come and give me a constructive analysis of something that I've been working on, or give me a suggestion. But I've never listened to negatives because it doesn't really serve any purpose. You're not gonna make everybody happy. Some people live to be miserable. And some people just live to kind of critique, not because they have some problem with a song, but because it makes them in their own way feel inadequate about themselves, and they're using it to take a swing at you. So there's lots of different reasons why people do things. So in the end, the only person you ever answer to is yourself. If you make a mistake, it's your responsibility. And I've always liked the do-it-yourself attitude, the hardcore mentality, doing my own graphics, doing really summoning up every ounce of strength to try to get people involved and get people working with us so that we can get out and do concerts, so we can do whatever. And it's given me an incredible amount of satisfaction in my life. It became the thing that I was the most proud of. I mean, for better or worse, it can suck the life out of you, and it can really put you through some periods of time when things become successful that you kind of sit there and wonder why you do what you do. But it has got, when you say that it's gotten you through dark times, it's gotten me through those too. And it's a bizarre thing. And I feel that is one of the things that we all connect on, because without those songs, I mean, I say about Empires, I had the choice, as I said, of waking up or not. And I didn't really come to that point. My mind was kind of wandering there. I was going through a form of depression and madness. And Empires was the light that really set me back on my course. And had it not been for that album, I don't know where I'd be. I really don't. I know I would have made music because I can't stop. But when people would say to me, like, song A or B has gotten them through hard times, I always say ditto. So anyway, we should go on to another question. Otherwise, we're going to hear all night.
It's interesting. Well, just kind of real quick, what's funny is my weekly show, Dark Indulgence. Of course, on Mixcloud, there's so many people making. Everybody has a mix show now, and everybody, when they meet me, they ask me, "What's my formula?" Because they want to try to figure out. Because like when I'll be honest, it's funny. Today I have I think 7,400 followers on Mixcloud, and what's interesting is last night during DOS Machine Live, my buddy I was with that was doing the video with me, he remembers that when I first put a mix on Mixcloud, I said, man, wouldn't it be awesome if I can get 100 followers on this thing? And then, and what's interesting is the formula to it, though, really is that I absolutely love this music and always have for decades now, so since the 80s. And interestingly enough, though, my show each week is a mixtape from me. And I
Yeah.
just happened to share it with people, and I got lucky enough that people like it. So because everybody always wants to know, how do you make a mix show successful? And I can't tell them how to do it because I just record music for myself each week, and I always think, oh, wow, I hope some people like it.
Yeah.
and
Seriously,
thankfully they do.
it is the formula. I mean, people have always asked, like, what's success? And I say, well, or some advice for bands or for anybody in a creative profession. And I say, never make money your goal because you're more likely to fail than not. If you make, let's say, success could be that you are successful with using your passion and making something of it and doing something very, very creative with it. If you're successful with that and you put all your passion and your heart into it, you do it for yourself. Well, if money is needed, and it's always needed because it's needed to pay bills and it's needed to pay for equipment and it's needed to pay for tours and what have you, but it comes as a consequence. If that's what you need, at the end of the day, you're providing a soundtrack for people. We're old enough to all remember when people would hand around mixtapes to each other. They were like, that was the way I got to learn about a lot of bands. I mean, that's how I learned about DAF. Somebody gave me a mixtape in 1981 at school and said, this guy from another school, it was his older brother, was into some very, very eclectic music. And he said, I'm sure you're going to like this. I don't like it, but I think you might. And it had DAF on it. And I went absolutely crazy about it because that was exactly my thing at the time. That's what I wanted to hear. You're acting as a curator of your sound, of the music that you like. If you played, and it's a criticism I have of a lot of, or I had of a lot of DJs, even playing our stuff back then, was that it was becoming like a set double CD that was being played every single time you went to the club. And I wasn't hearing new, and I even said, well, what I've done was new for a time, but surely there must be something else we can play. Surely there must be something else that gets heard that keeps people rolling and moving forward rather than becoming stuck in a rut.
Right. That's one of the biggest driving factors with us with DOS Machine.
Absolutely. Darren and I were talking this morning, and we were just like that. That's what the reason like it's so important to me being with DOS Machine. And we were talking about, like, on one of the formulas I use now on Dark Indulgence is trying to deliver people a sound, introducing people to music that they don't even know they like yet. And it's so awesome because when I look at the screen here, I see Danny, I see Darren, and it's like so amazing because there's these DJs around me that are the same way and so forward thinking. That's why I'm amazed every time I see on Facebook somebody says, "Oh, there's no good music that comes out anymore." And I mean, it's completely laughable. I mean, what closet have you been living in? Come on, man. It's all around.
The amount of music that you and me and Danny, routinely go through, it's just mind-boggling. I mean, like where Scott's going with it, I mean, we have a rule with DOS Machine. I mean, if it's more than a couple of years old, I mean, other than, every now and again, like, we don't play it. We definitely don't play Dead Stars here, though.
There's I don't mind the song. I don't mind.
Inside joke. It's an inside joke that's been around with us since we did our first show at Elysium. And somebody came up and asked me, and I looked at him. I was like, "We don't play Dead Stars here."
Big chrome military fashion show, and then Dead Stars.
That's right. That's man. That was LA 2007 for me.
I think Darren's motto with that, really what it ends up being, is not so much about Dead Stars, and I can always take Darren saying that as the fact is that we're not predictable. When somebody comes to a DOS Machine, you're going to be introduced to something that you haven't heard before. If you don't really, and if they don't desire that, then we're not the venue. There's retro nights that do that.
There's other songs by Covenant that are totally awesome.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
I still to this day, I will, if I go back and listen to like a classic, it's Go Film or something like that. It's just, there are so many great songs and so many bands that I think most people have never even heard of or never will, because there was a heyday at one point when everybody got to hear about this, and then things have kind of tapered off. Where the hot new music scene is, when people say there's no new good music, I'm always playing stuff in my office or playing stuff on tour, and people are always asking, we're all asking each other, what's this? Because we all have very diverse or eclectic tastes, and we learn from each other. But they're like, for example, when the dark wave revival happened, that wasn't out of this scene. That was a whole other genre of young kids, 16 to 20 years old, trying to be their heroes from like late 70s and early 80s bands, and it just kind of exploded in its own way. There are underground EBM related genres. There's a whole wave of this stuff coming out of Berlin, and none of these guys have anything to do with our scene. And they're doing stuff that sounds like old wax tracks. There's an incredible amount of it coming out. I mean, some of it's very derivative, but a lot of it is really creative and forward thinking because they've had the time to listen to, be exposed to a lot of other styles of music at the time. I just think it's wherever you're at. If you're in an enclosed little bubble, you won't hear new stuff. But if you branch out and you go down the YouTube rabbit hole, you will find incredible amounts of sounds, especially in underground dance. It's amazing how much of that is still very heavily reliant upon 80s proto-industrial sounds. Like you take an artist like, there's a Berlin act called, I'll pronounce it as German, but Schwefelgelb, means sulfur. They have this incredible sound that sounds almost like an early Nitzer Ebb record from like the first 12 inches. And that is considered to be an underground, sort of an underground dance scene sound. It's bizarre and diverse. Another example, around about 2001, when I moved to when I moved to Hamburg, I met up with a bunch of DJs who were doing a sound called, at the time it was called Schranz. It was this very industrial, very distorted form of dance music, of techno. I met a couple of the DJs and I started to play them things like Winterkälte and all the stuff from like Hans and Zen. Like the power noise thing was really big at the time. And they were all blown away by this, but they all had the same question: where's the bass drum? And I said, well, see, that's the difference. Is that there are two different formats of making the music. One is made to have a kind of a dance sensibility, and one isn't. They were going off. I mean, I think Chris Liebing, who was one of the big DJs in that at the time, he was off like buying up like the entire Hans catalog. And it was really influencing his stuff. And he would go off and he would do DJ sets where he was playing this stuff over like drum loops. And it was an incredible hybrid thing. And I mean, I love all that people cross-pollinate their music styles. So, you know, you take an artist like, let's say, I mean, he's had his day and he's kind of come and gone, but you take an artist like Gesaffelstein. I heard, because one of the guys who works with me, who's my assistant producer, he's a very big underground dance artist. He's always playing new stuff to me. And so he says, I think you'll really like this or whatever else. Those things get, they obviously become influences in what I do. But at the same time, it's really interesting to hear artists. I mean, he was on a label in Paris with The Hacker, who's always had this kind of old school electro thing going. And some of the other artists like Millimetric and what have you, they were doing this kind of really sort of, okay, imagine we're a band, but we only have a drum machine and two synths. And we have a sequencer that we can basically do minimal little loops of sequences. Well, we're going to make something really, really weird, and they have their own take on it. But when I've played this in my own DJ sets, I've had people walking up going, okay, what the hell is this? Or I'll play good time music, songs that make me happy. I mean, you must remember what it was like to stand on a dance floor when they played Wolfsheim's Once in a Lifetime, the first time you heard it, whether you liked Wolfsheim or not. The fact was, the song was like, when you're in high school and you just want that victory song, which makes you feel like all the crap you're going through is going to go away, and you have this personal revelational moment. I had that once on a dance floor where I heard that song and I thought, oh my God, this has just made my life better. I'll play stuff like that. I'll play lots of different things. And it's just bringing various sounds together. And people will always ask afterwards what that was. I think people who get stuck in a rut and only want to hear the hits, it's fine to drop them in, but yeah. Anyway.
Speaking of new music, between 1999 and 2003, I was in the Air Force, and I was actually in a cowpoke town of Cheyenne, Wyoming. That's where I was stationed as the nuclear missileer. There was a little record store there, and they would always put the industrial artists with the black metal artists. And I was a huge black metal fan, into death metal and everything. Well, speaking of Covenant, I was looking for the black metal band Covenant, that also started with a C. They went through the legal issues, winded up changing their name to Covenant with a K. And I was also looking for a band called Over. So right next to Over was VNV Nation, and it was Praise the Fallen. It was that album. So I picked it up thinking you were a black metal band or an atmospheric black metal band. And
I am. You got me. You got me. I have the death mask makeup on right now. And, the 6-inch nail gauntlets.
So what was funny is I winded up listening to the album and I absolutely loved it because I also come from a old school rave techno background. I would listen to it. I would take it out when we go to the missile silos. We would blast music all the time out in the middle of Nebraska and Colorado, and you were just jamming to it out in the missile field. And then 9/11 happened, and I gotta say, your music was so uplifting after 9/11, and here we are still stuck out in the missile silos, and we don't know what's going on. We don't know if we have to turn the button anytime soon, and just to get us through it, we were listening to VNV, funny enough, Leather Strip, stuff like Covenant, and then as well as industrial metal bands like Fear Factory and Pain, bands like that. And I gotta say, your music was so uplifting. It got us through those, kind of bad times while we were in the military, not knowing what was going to happen because we're stuck in a hole for 24 hours. And I gotta say, listening to those early records of yours, I just wonder, you growing up, who were your influences as a kid of music?
That is a hard one. I grew up in Ireland, which was this wayward backwater of Europe at the time. I don't know what attracted me to electronics, but something resonated, and I remember there was this track by this artist called Hot Butter, and they had this track called Popcorn, a rather insipid track, but I was a kid. Obviously, I was very, very, very young, but I remember it, and I remember my mom listening to like Nancy Sinatra and stuff like that, and sort of bopping around the kitchen. Music, for some reason, resonated with me, and through the 70s, even as a very young child, without any kind of cultivated understanding of what I liked or what I didn't, all these amazing pioneer artists started to come out, like, say, Jean-Michel Jarre and what have you, and they would get played and they became like a really big thing. But Irish TV and radio was constantly using this music for its link music when they would talk about an upcoming program or even using it as the theme music of a show. And I got very heavily exposed to a lot of really good electronic music. I liked, there were other songs I obviously liked that were by more kind of conventional bands. And I can't really name, say, a particular band. I started buying records, I guess. My dad bought me Kraftwerk's Autobahn because they started to play there's a guy who did an animation, like a cartoon for the track Autobahn, which started to be shown on TV in the late 70s. It was this weird, very psychedelic, there's no explanation for this is just trippy weirdness. Came right out of the sort of 60s school of things. But I'd heard the track all the years, like when I was on the radio, because it was a #1 track in a lot of countries in Europe. People loved it because it had this kind of beatniky vibe to it, but it was cute and, just weird. And there were a lot of those tracks playing during the 70s, and they all kind of somehow gelled. But here's a weird one. When it comes to a music that I fell in love with, as well as liking all this, I was a nerd, obviously. I was crazy about sci-fi, crazy about astronomy, all things space. I mean, the 70s was a brilliant era for that. They would use great electronic music in all the sort of science shows. So I would watch things like Tomorrow's World, which was this BBC, this British technology show, and they had a whole report about Kraftwerk. So I would see these guys playing these machines, and it looked like an electronics laboratory. So as a nerd, I'm like, well, that was sold. And then, home computers were kind of like the next big thing. And I was just so in love with just the look of technology. And obviously the what was still kind of floating around then was that sort of 50s view of how the future was going to be. And that we'd all be sort of, you'd have a couple waving at a spaceship taking off from their base on the moon, these old sort of like 50s illustrations.
You get those old art pieces and stuff. Yeah, I love those things growing up.
I absolutely worshipped all that kind of stuff. And, comic books were really big at the time, as in they were in they were in a whole new wave. And the British comic books were very, very sci-fi oriented. And we were getting like stories like Strontium Dog, which was just the winner for me. It was like everything just tied together. There was this incredible cohesion between electronic music and science fiction. It kind of come out of the whole hippie era of imagining abstract worlds, the Tangerine Dream type thing, to it being a scientific approach to music. And then I saw Giorgio Moroder on Top of the Pops playing with this wall of synthesizer, doing this horrible disco track. And I just looked at it and that's it. That's what I want to own. I must have this. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I've just always been crazy about it. Now, here's the weird one. I was in a bar in Hamburg where they run this, unfortunately it doesn't exist anymore, but they had this like indie kind of dance nights. The place would be packed. Hamburg's got an incredible punk scene, an alternative kind of sort of punk and roll kind of scene. My girlfriend and I would go to this bar, and we just loved it because it was just a whole other vibe and a whole other scene. It was something that it's another part of my life, another part of my music tastes. Everybody's like, it's just, there's no rules, no limit. Everyone's just having the best time. It's like the best college party ever for alternative types, but people are in their 40s and they're just living their best life in this place on a Friday and Saturday night. Anyway, they would play a bizarre mix of music, and I'm sitting there talking to her. We're just sitting at the side of this dance floor the size of a phone booth. We're just sitting there yabbering away. The selector's Too Much Pressure came on. And in the space of half a word, I was up and gone. And that's the one that really surprises a lot of people. I was mental about ska. Like when the sort of the second wave of ska came out, 78, 79, absolutely mental about it. I collected all the old 60s records, still crazy about it to this day. It's kind of like this is the first time I'm actually telling this I think in an interview, but at the same time, I would also have all these electronic records, and I was crazy about the kind of the new up and coming, the Human League, the early Human League with all of their stuff. And I was crazy about all of that at the same time. It was this dichotomy in me of listening to, what had come out of the punk explosion in Europe. I mean, Ireland was pretty tied to Great Britain. So all the punk sounds started to come out. I was still too young to really be old enough to do it as a teenager. I was still like 11 or 12 years old. I think the main thing that the 80s exploded over here with an incredible wave of alternative music. The charts were full of it. You guys got to see it thanks to, I think it's Mike Nesbitt from the Monkees. There's an amazing documentary about how he started MTV, and he had no material because he made a video for a song and he had nowhere to show it because videos would be shown on general sort of culture shows, and they'd have like maybe 15 minutes to show a couple of videos here and there, but video wasn't a thing. So he'd made a video for this track, so he asked Warner, could I borrow one of your satellite channels and pipe this into hotels and whatever entertainment places? He had no material. So he looked at, where can we get videos from? Well, all these Brits in the new romantic and the futurist world of things and the alternative world of things, they'd all gone to art school and they all had access to video equipment. They were making all these quasi-experimental expressionist videos, and they just got tons of that over and converted it from PAL to NTSC and pioneered the process. And then suddenly you have tons of alternative music showing on your TV of bands like New Order or Depeche Mode and Echo and the Bunnymen and all that kind of stuff. That was all happening over here, and I was just sucking every bit of it up. I can't say any one band. I was a mental Depeche Mode fan in the 80s. There's no doubt about that. I think people can still hear that.
Most of us were at one point in time in our lives just like, Depeche Mode.
But it's weird. You don't realize when you're a teenager what half those lyrics are really about until you get to be an adult. And then you go back and listen to them and go, wow, some of these tracks are kind of creepy. Why do you go with little girls all the time? I mean, it's a bit weird. Okay. And I don't know. It was Violator came out, and I realized I had lost all interest in Depeche Mode. I mean, I'd started to get really in the 80s. I went into a record store where there was this punk guy behind the counter who would play me all these new things and say, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? We just talk about music. He played me the very first, the release, the Front 242's release that came up after Geography. I think it was either What You Hear Is What You Get, or it wouldn't have been Commando Mix. I think I came later. I'm sorry, I'm totally destroying my cred by not making the name. But I'd already been into DAF and like La Dusseldorf. There was a band from Stuttgart called Keine Ahnung, which is their name means no idea. So when I walked up to a German girl in my school and said, hey, there's this band I really like. What does Keine Ahnung mean? She goes, no idea. And I went, well, you're German. You should know it. And she goes, no idea. And I went, hi, it's German. And this is not a joke. I mean, it sounds like a comedy sketch, but yeah, anyway. So I got straight.
It was no comment.
Thank you. You just looked that up?
Yeah, I had to go. I went look it up. Yeah. Google. Yeah, Google.
So there were so many things happening in the 80s. There was everything from acid house and house music to the alternative dance music. I mean, the UK was completely crazy about its Kit Kat parties and warehouse parties, and where people were just playing alternative dance it's just everything mishmashed together. And all of that had some kind of influence on me. I mean, there are some albums which I regard as key albums. There are songs I regard as key songs, but bands I've religiously followed, there are too many influences, but bands I religiously followed. I mean, Depeche Mode was my first concert. That was 1981, my first official concert. I kind of snuck in to see a band play, I think it was half a song, when I was about 12, and I was summarily kicked out, which may or may not have been Joy Division. The fun thing was that there was this explosion of all these bands like OMD were coming over to Dublin, and they would start their tours. Depeche Mode started their tours in Ireland for some, as a kind of a warm-up to kind of iron out the kinks in their tour. So every time they released a new album, their tour would come through Dublin and I would be there. And it was crazy to go from a small hall that held 500 people to, when they released Black Celebration, they went to a hall that held 5,000, and seeing this thing suddenly explode and evolve. I snuck away from home and kind of hitchhiked to go see Front 242 in Paris back in their very early days when they had the commando netting on the stage and all that stuff, but they had the camouflage netting. And it's just bizarre to look back on it and say there was just crazy mishmash where I would be into 4AD bands like this Mortal Coil, but at the same time I'd also be into like really heavy, hard, distorted music that would worry my parents that there was something wrong with me. No music had. One band that I've always been a crazy fan of was Cabaret Voltaire, early or late 70s to early 80s. I got to hear it in a record store when I was a naive kid, and they were playing The Voice of America. And I loved the fact that somebody had made this insane ambient album, and I became a huge Cabaret Voltaire fan after that. So all of these things, they all played a role in my sort of upbringing. But at the same time, I also listened to I also listened to blues. I also listened to some jazz. I still listen to a lot of classical music. Ireland was really big on live bands. So, from an early age, you would learn about Sly Stone. You'd learn about Otis Redding. You'd learn about all this kind of stuff. And it somehow fits in with our very, very soulful, our own music is very, very soulful and tragic, singing about how hard things had been. And I guess, it all blends together. I can't really say, sorry, I didn't answer your question, but I've given you a weird kind of left at the lights and right at the crossroads kind of way around my music listening in the 80s.
Well, I'll say one thing. I mean, you're in good company. I'm still, to this day, still a fan of ska. My second band in high school, we didn't even get a name for it, right? We didn't come up with a name for it, but my second band in high school was a ska band. So I was playing trombone and singing.
I was badly playing the home organ.
We never recorded anything. I should have, because if we had, I'd be like, you want to hear something really bad? Here, check this out. So, no, to this day, I still love ska. Ska is like, I don't know, it was kind of like making that kind of mesh back to older music for me, like where you had like,
there's something wonderful that just like enlivens the spirit. I mean, when I was on the Gothic cruise and I was finishing Transnational, and I had to stay on the boat in order to finish it because there'd been a whole cock up with some of the recordings. Assistant producer emailed me while I was on the boat and said, you need to re-record some of the vocals because there are clicks in these and I didn't hear it until I went on headphones. I had to stay on the boat, and when we were docked in Jamaica, I was playing ska the whole time, playing all this old school ska. And the women who were like cleaning all the rooms, they were all from like either Jamaica or Trinidad, Tobago, and they were all going nuts, wondering. And I'm having the best time of my life, even though I didn't get to get off the boat and step foot because I had to literally kneel down in front of the bed, put up 4 pillows in front of me, and hold them. And I don't know, I had a microphone with me because I guess we were doing a gig or something, and I had a microphone and an audio interface, and recorded the vocals in the cabin on the boat. But all I remember is just playing ska the whole morning, rolling into Jamaica, and then going off and finishing a VNV album, which was kind of real. But anyway,
that actually like is a good segue into because you mentioned transnational, but it was around the same time, and this goes towards our marketing director's question. So you put out the Resonance album, and
yes,
and y'all had the orchestral stuff, and which was like super cool. Like my marketing director and I are both like very. I mean, I come from a classical background. I mean, I was classically trained, trombone, things like that. So, like, he and I both have this whole, like, we have a love of stuff like that. And so when you put that out, we were both just, like, completely floored, right? So here's what he wants to know, and he has a reason behind that. And after we find out, he's like, well, then we can let him know later. But are you going to do something like that again? Because that was super cool.
Short answer, yes. Just to give you kind of a build,
Bobo, he just said it.
But to give you a little build-up as to how that happened, there's a festival over here called Gothic Meets Classic, and I mean everything in Germany is called Gothic. If you wear black, it's Gothic. I kind of coming from the '80s, obviously I have a little bit of a problem with the terminology, but never mind, it's okay. Whatever makes you happy. And they asked if VNV would play in it. And I said, sure, this has been my dream since I was a child. I'd been a soprano when I was a kid, and I'd performed with a choir, and I'd performed with an orchestra at the time, and I never forgot it, and I never lost the love of wanting to do something with a proper orchestra. It's why there have always been allusions to orchestral flavors in the music that I write, and even Praise the Fallen was heavily a lot of melodies. There was this motif that was running through the album, which was heavily inspired by pieces of music by Dvorak and Sibelius and Elgar. I got a phone call. Would you like to perform your songs with an orchestra? And the guy, I don't think he even got the question out. And I just said yes after the first half of the question. So in order to do this, normally what bands would do is they would just A/B them. I'd send him a list of tracks. He would say which ones are most compatible. I would send him versions of them. And I said, okay, good, this is great. I think we can work this. And rather than him just making a orchestral version of the song, which sounds a little bit like, I don't know, Celine Dion-ish, like playing an orchestra playing in the background, playing a orchestrated or arranged for orchestra, but not necessarily classical. So he and I he didn't have a huge amount of time, the arranger, but we had a lot of fun writing notes to each other. And I would tell him, no, in this element of this song, the phrasing should be more like this because it should have this sort of sensibility to it. And this is what I'm saying. And I would give him cues from pieces of classical music. So we could use the library or the rubric of classical music as a common language in writing this. When we got to doing Resonance, because we played the concert was incredibly overwhelming. I think it is the most unforgettable experience for me in my entire life. There is nothing that had a greater impact on me, because this was the culmination of a dream, playing in one of the most beautiful halls. They were supposed to record the show. The recording didn't work. I think the people who were doing it really had no idea what they were doing. But that kind of led me to, well, I've got to do this. I've got to follow through. So I talked to the arranger about, can we take these arrangements and can we turn them into a record? There was a bit of a legal fight. I got to rewrite songs as the way I would have liked to have done it. I thought that the arrangements that were the most beautiful were things like Beloved. Hearing the intro to Beloved played by an actual orchestra was so
that was really moving,
overwhelming for me. It was like I develop a distance from my songs. I write songs which are about aspects of me or my life, and I develop a distance from them because you hear them over and over as you're producing them. So when you actually get to do it with the orchestra, it slows time down, because you're standing there in front of a microphone, hearing the music being played by an orchestra, something you've always wanted. And it is, for me, it was like going through a visual diary of all of the moments in my life. And I realized this is what other people had been describing to me when they were hearing these songs. And I had never had that experience because I had had this sort of, emotional, not a disconnect, but a little bit of a numbing. I could barely keep my composure. I was crying. I mean, it wasn't just tears of like, oh, woe is me. It was more like this was the most overly emotional situation I'd ever been in. So when we got to do Resonance, the whole plan had been made out, and I said, okay, we're going to do this, and this. I think the thing that blew us away was when we finished Resolution, Sentinel. And the reason Sentinel was so amazing was I sat there and wrote it out on piano and sent him the entire arrangement played out on piano with all of the pauses, with all of the breathing, with all of the breaks. And I kind of thought that Sentinel had been this fakely optimistic track. There was a psychology at work on the album of Faith, Power and Glory as to how the songs would follow one another. It would start off being almost very clinical, very machine-like, which was a song, Sentinel, and then it ended up being the most organic and biological of the songs, which was Where There Is Light, which was just like an indie song. So I wanted to do something where I imagined that this song of kind of hope was being sung sarcastically in the ashes of what was left over of a city. And that I'm sitting there on my own next to an oil drum that's burning, singing this song. And that was and I imagined an entire video, almost like a cinematic movie for what I would use as visuals for that. So when I was writing the tracks, this opened another door in that we could go on and we can write whole new pieces. We can also take tracks that have not been arranged for orchestra and completely rewrite them into whole new ways, rephrase them in ways that would present a whole other aspect of the track which most people had missed. So songs you haven't heard, there is a version of Honor for orchestra, which has been, I have live recordings of it. And the other one, which I regard as the best of them all, is Farthest Star. Farthest Star gives me chills when I hear it. It is almost like this is how the song should have been done. There's no way around it. It's like there's this little break in the song, where you hear this little kind of piano loop, and I say like, if we fall and break. And it's the piece after that when it's coming back into this big sort of moving sort of build up to the chorus again in the original track. When that's played, there's a solo cello playing, and I just lose it every single time. Lose it. Like a big baby. I can't, we played this about 10 times around Germany. Can't. So this year we were supposed to be playing, I was supposed to be playing an orchestral concert at the Meraluna Festival in Germany, in Hildesheim. Of course, with all the festivals being cancelled, that's not going to happen until next year. But that gave us the opportunity to look at all the tracks since Resonance and say, okay, are the tracks we've missed? Are there tracks I've written that would not equate to VNV songs that I would like to use for this? And I'm writing songs all the time. So I said, yes, absolutely, we're going to do this. So we've done Goodbye 20th Century, which is pretty much played as is on automatic. We've done that live. We were going to do Farthest Star. We were going to do Honor. Honor is actually phenomenal as an orchestral track. You might not think so, but it conveys the message of the track a lot better than the original, which surprises me. But this has given us a way to writing whole new songs. So there will be a Resonance too, and that's the long answer.
So the reason that he wanted me to ask that is he has a family member fairly high up in the California Philharmonic. And
Whoa!
So he wanted me to ask if you were going to do that again, and then if it would be cool of him to go.
Yes.
Okay. So Bobo, there you go. Call your family. Let them know. Ronan's like, yes.
When out of this, oh my God, I would absolutely. It's actually been a really big thing for me to think about how to do this in the United States. And I've been in contact with a couple of orchestras. This is something that you can contact agencies who hook up artists with orchestras. For some reason, we, as in all these bands like us or this category, kind of promotes fear in some people. They kind of think you're going to come out in, I don't know, like death masks or something like that.
You're like coming out like.
Yeah, and bite the head off animals and stuff like that.
It's like, we're not Ozzy, man. man.
We're really nice. We're just happy to sort of sit there playing playing with computers. We don't really do anything weird. Sorry.
It's not our fault that we like black. I mean, we look good in it, okay? It's slimmy.
Okay, so I've got a quick question here, somewhat DOS Machine Dark Indulgence related. But when you were talking about music songs you liked, and about when you mentioned DJ sets, some of the best episodes I've ever done were where I had a producer artist do a 45-minute set of some of their favorite music. So absolutely, at some point, I'm sure Danny, who loves listening to my show every week, but I'd love to get you to do a guest DJ spot with me on Dark Indulgence where I can pick out some more of my favorite VNV songs, and then you doing like a 45-minute DJ set of anything, like even like the AF, anything you like.
I'm totally up for that. I've actually built up set lists in iTunes where I've said, okay, I mean, it's Sunday evening here. I know that there's someone waiting at home wondering where the hell I am, and I'm still sitting here. It's all dark outside and whatever, and this is my life. I wish I had the time to just quite simply, and this is where everybody's locked down, and I said if we had the opportunity, I would have one of my friends help me out with this so that I could focus on getting all the cabling done in the studio, but to get a bunch of Spotify playlists up, and one of them was my favorite swing tracks, because I'm a really big fan of like either late 20s, early 30s hotel orchestras. One of my favorite stations to listen to is actually broadcast out of Fort Worth. It's called Radio Dismuke. And they play like all this beautiful music from the 20s and 30s, or playing my favorite ambient tracks and making a set list of my favorite, say, new classical. I'm a huge fan of things like A Winged Victory for the Sullen. I don't know if these artists mean anything to you, but there's been this whole wave of organic new classical out in the last number of years, which is phenomenal and incredibly profound. And then everything from that to like my favorite indie tracks or my favorite industrial tracks or my favorite whatever, and just basically doing a different playlist and say, have a look inside my head. These are the tracks that move me. Favorite teenage tracks. I mean, some friends of mine never had the opportunity to grow up in the 80s, so they keep asking me to sort of play them, go randomly on YouTube and find my favorite 80s tracks, which are never Cyndi Lauper or Madonna or any of that.
Yeah, like I'll tell you, like, so it's so funny because like two of my favorite songs from the 80s, I love Flying Turns, Crash Course in Science, and I'll never forget the first time I heard Warm Leatherette. Yeah, I mean, so overlooked. I see people's 80s playlists. You hardly ever see anybody play the normal. Well, of course.
First time I ever heard that was at Numbers and was like, what the fuck is this and why do I like
what
this
is
so
it?
much?
Yeah. You're right. I remember giving it to people on mixtapes because, you know, growing up here in Cajun, Louisiana, where people listen to country music and Zydeco, and then here's me walking around high school as a 13, 14-year-old DJ handing out tapes with the normal on it. You know?
Now, there was a lot of weird unknown artists at the time, and there were fanzines around where, you know, you'd see a list of records, and people ask, how did you hear about music? And I would say, well, we didn't have the internet, obviously, but we had fanzines where it was specialized in a certain style of music. They might have included a cassette with it, where you would hear, you know, snippets of all these different bands that they were trying to sell, and they would have the back half of the fanzine would just be long lists of 12 inches and albums you could buy and singles you could buy. And that's how I heard about Portion Control around about 1983. Absolutely loved it from the word go. I mean, that was, to me, that was Nitzareb before Nitzareb. And then I was lucky to see them on tour with Depeche Mode in 1984. And they blew Depeche Mode away, because I was just watching this guy with this prototype sampler on stage. He had an ironing board as the keyboard stand because these guys had no money. And that's what I loved. It was real. And they had a slideshow going and a whole bunch of stuff. But it was just raw and brilliant. And I thought, this is like the democratization of music. This is now coming down to everyone's level, where you could just make weird stuff in your house using this incredibly advanced technology that you'd only ever seen like major pros using. But yeah, going back to it, I would love to do a set list. We just need some parameters, and I will go for it. I'd be happy.
And here's the perimeters. There's no perimeters. As Danny can tell you, on Dark Indulgence, it's all about whatever music the person. That's why people like Matt Finale from from Caustic, when he did my show, he said, oh man, you know, I'm gonna play some stuff. It's like way different than what you normally do. I said, well, that's why you're coming on my show.
Well,
you know.
This is good. And the thing is, I'd love to play a lot of stuff that there are a lot of unknown '80s industrial acts that, as to what we call industrial now, say would have been prototype industrial electronic sort of alternative dance stuff that a lot of people would never have heard because it was just a 12-inch at the time. And I was going to the clubs, the club in Dublin called The Source, which played a mishmash of this and goth music and other kinds of like post-punk. And then I went and moved to London, and then I was going to either acid house parties or prototype techno parties, and then going to the Hard Club, where you would rub shoulders with Ralph Hooder from Kraftwerk. Martin Gore would be dancing on the dance floor. David Bowie was in there. It was the wild new frontier of this incredible new stylish electronic music. Even all the fashion magazines were covering it. This was the hip new thing to be into. And thankfully, it never became commercial. It just inspired a ton of artists to go off and do their own thing.
I do have one other one. This one's actually from Carmina down in Houston, DJ Mina, that does Underworld.
Yeah.
And she wanted me to say, and I already told her, I was like, look, you're not doing that by yourself, okay? This is gonna be all of us working. You're not. When are you guys have? I mean, obviously the virus is changed a lot of stuff, but when around about are you thinking? VNV will be coming back through the States, and what do we got to do to make sure that VNV plays at numbers and not
I'd love to play at numbers.
else?
Everybody wants that. Everybody wants that.
Yeah, we all want that. I mean, I just moved to Austin back a year and a half ago, right? I was living in Houston most of my life. I mean, I grew up there. Numbers is that's my home. Even now, I mean, Elysium's my home now, but I mean, Numbers is always going to be my home. Everybody that's there, that works there, they're family. I mean, I've been going there since I hope Mom's not watching, since I was 15, right? I'm 41. I've been going there since I was 15.
What would have been conducive was the Automatic Empires tour. The whole point of that was to play small clubs and play at punk as fuck, which we'd done over in Germany. I had to come up with an idea for a gig that we were playing on the way to play a huge gig in Munich the next night in an old electrical factory. And en route, we were going to be playing at a tiny youth club. They had asked if we could play as a way for them to raise funds for the youth club. And if someone throws an idea like that at me, I'm game. I love it. So we went in with no lights. I mean, there were 4 of the cheapest moving lights possible and 2 little kind of like light bars on the stage. But this is where like local kid bands would get up and cut their teeth. And we went on and played. And I said, all right, we're going to do this, but we're going to play Automatic and Empires. We're going to mix up all the tracks and play as much as we can. So when we played this around Germany, I restricted the club size to as small as possible. This is really kind of a fan show. This isn't a big, normal tour show or something. And we do it seat of our pants. We do it as like lo-fi as possible. And we did the same thing around the United States, and it was phenomenal for that because we got to play a lot of towns we would never have gotten a chance to play because it was conducive to playing small venues. And with a lot of tours, we could do that. We could, just about make it as far as finances were concerned. But as far as us coming back, everyone's going to say, let's wait and see what happens with this, whether we're going to be living with this virus or whether we're going to be dealing with it as a post situation where it disappears like SARS did, or it's going to be a situation where you've got a vaccine or some kind of treatment or whatever else.
Right.
But I love playing the US. I love visiting the US. I own a car over there, which I take on extensive road trips. It's a 1948 Chrysler that I absolutely adore, and I haven't seen it.
I love it.
Yeah. Over here, I've got a 38 Nash 2-door sedan, which I absolutely adore. And it's the last surviving 2-door Nash in the world. So, or 32 doors. So I'm kind of the custodian of that. But I have too many friends in the US. I actually got sad over this because I thought, when are we going to be able to go back? I love to take holidays there and go to national parks and go to places that most people would never think of venturing. I mean, one of my holidays a number of years ago was driving around the back roads of Michigan, that's my idea of a holiday. I cannot sit at a beach on a chair. I want to get out and meet real people and go to the weirdest little towns.
I'm all about the forest. I don't know what it is. Mountains and forests that's my shit.
Well, I've got
Go on. Here's what you need to do though is Danny loves coming from Houston and Lake Charles, but you got to come have Cajun food and alligators.
I
Cajun
love
country.
Cajun food. Don't you
There's
worry about
absolutely nothing else like it.
I love
I
Florida
live in the
Texas.
middle of it.
Yeah, he does. We
I live
mess
in the
with him all
middle
the
of
time,
it.
like his our
Cajun
first,
Central.
yeah,
Hey.
the first DOS machine
Oh, look,
online.
my shirt. Cajun DMX.
when we were testing out stuff for the first DOS machine online, we had Scott on and Xavier from Ruin Conflict, and we pulled Danny in. We had Wicked Goth on, and we're all on just literally just talking shit, and like Scott's connection keeps going out, and we started jacking. I was like, it's like, man, what you got that DSL over there, that digital swamp line, man? Throw the crawfish on. You need some more crawfish. Put some, man. You know what? You need some more kernels. Throw some corn in, man.
No, I've had the first visit to the US with the band. We stopped off in some sort of backwater towns where we'd sort of stop off for a bite to eat, and there'd just be a little diner. And I was being introduced to things that I'd never enjoyed before. I'm not a fan of grits. I apologize.
That's okay. Neither am I.
But I mean, nobody does barbecue like Americans do. I'm sorry, just nobody does barbecue like
Texans.
It's dangerous for my health, but
I mean, for us Texans, I mean, it's
That's just
barbecuing,
food.
it's in our blood, right? It's part
Yeah.
it's part of our DNA. Like if you call yourself a Texan, but you can't barbecue, like you're not a Texan.
I'm pulling
you
your
just live-
Texan card.